All right, so today we're going to do a deep dive on something I think pretty much everyone has come across at some point.
Oh, yeah.
Narcissists.
For sure.
You know, those people who just kind of like suck the air out of the room.
Yeah. Yeah.
So we're going to use this piece called Don't Give Your Power Away to a Narcissist.
Okay.
I love that title, by the way.
Yeah.
It's really about like giving you the tools to deal with these personalities.
Exactly. And it's a really common experience.
Oh, yeah.
And, a lot of people go through it. So it's important to remember that you're not alone.
Yeah, for sure. So the source kind of kicks off by saying, we need to be able to identify a narcissist.
That's right.
Right off the bat. Like, if you don't know what you're dealing with, how can you protect yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. It's like having a radar.
Right.
Right. For these personality types.
Yeah.
So the source breaks down some key traits.
Okay.
Grandiosity, lack of empathy, and that constant need for admiration.
Okay, so let's unpack grandiosity for a second.
Yep.
That sounds like somebody who just loves themselves a little too much.
It does.
What does that actually look like in real life?
Okay, so think of it as this inflated sense of self-importance.
Okay.
Like, it's not just confidence.
Yeah.
It's this belief that they're superior.
Mm-hmm.
They deserve special treatment.
Right.
They might exaggerate their achievements, name drop constantly, or just have this air of, well, I'm obviously the most brilliant person here.
I've definitely encountered that.
Right.
And that makes teamwork so interesting.
Yes.
So that's grandiosity. What about lack of empathy?
Yes.
That one seems particularly hard to deal with.
You're right. It can be a real challenge.
Yeah.
So empathy is all about understanding and sharing the feelings of others.
Right.
Someone lacking in empathy might hear you venting about a problem and just immediately turn the conversation back to themselves.
Oh, yeah.
Or even worse, they might just flat out dismiss your feelings.
Totally.
Like they just don't matter.
It's like when you're talking to somebody and you're like, have you even heard anything I've said?
Exactly.
It's like you're invisible.
Yes. And it's incredibly hurtful.
Uh-huh.
Especially, in close relationships.
Yeah.
Because it's like their emotional radar is completely switched off.
Wow. Okay, and then lastly, we have this constant need for admiration.
Yes.
Is that just like a fancy way of saying they're attention seekers?
Well, while all humans, kind of enjoy a certain level of validation.
Sure.
For a narcissist, it's like oxygen.
Oh, wow.
They just crave it to an unhealthy degree.
Okay.
And it's not just about a compliment here or there.
Uh-huh.
It's this driving force behind their actions.
I see.
So they might fish for praise constantly.
Right.
Sulk if they're not the center of attention,
Yeah.
or go to ridiculous lengths to try to impress others.
So it's less about genuinely connecting with others and more about just feeding their own ego.
Precisely.
Got it.
And it can be incredibly draining for the people around them.
Yeah, I can imagine.
Because they're constantly expected to prop up the narcissist's fragile sense of self.
Right. So we've identified these red flags. Now, where do we go from there?
Okay, well, here's where it gets really interesting.
Okay.
The source stresses the power of setting boundaries.
Okay.
So this is about you defining what's acceptable to you,
Right.
what you're willing to tolerate.
Okay.
And the source is very clear. These boundaries are not negotiable.
I love that firmness, but isn't that easier said than done?
Well, oh yeah.
Especially if the narcissist is like a family member or a coworker.
It can be challenging.
Right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But you have to remember that boundaries are about protecting your well-being.
Okay.
It's not about controlling the narcissist. It's about controlling your own reactions.
Right.
And how much you allow their behavior to impact you.
Okay, so let's say we have like a coworker who constantly steamrolls over you in meetings and like takes credit for your ideas.
Oh, I've seen that happen.
What kind of boundary could you set in that situation?
Well, you could start by directly addressing the behavior.
Okay.
Calmly, but firmly. You could say something like, hey, I noticed that you presented my idea in the meeting. I'd appreciate it if you acknowledged my contributions in the future.
Oh, that's a good one.
Right.
It's not aggressive,
Yeah.
but it's very clear.
It leaves no room for misinterpretation.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then if the behavior continues, you might need to escalate the boundary.
Okay.
For example, you could say, hey, I'm happy to share my ideas, but if you continue to present them as your own, I'll have to take it up with our manager.
Oh, okay.
So the key is to follow through with consequences
Right.
if the boundary is crossed.
Got it.
That's how you show that you're serious about protecting your space and your work.
That makes a lot of sense. It's not about being like mean or punitive or anything.
It's that.
It's about establishing these healthy boundaries.
Exactly.
And enforcing them.
Consistency is key
Yeah.
when dealing with narcissists.
Okay.
They often test boundaries
Right.
to see what they can get away with.
Yeah.
But when you stand firm and enforce those boundaries, it sends a powerful message.
Okay.
You're not a pushover.
Uh-huh.
You're not going to let them walk all over you.
I like it.
Yeah.
So, okay, I'm starting to see how boundaries are really crucial here.
Yeah.
It's like building a fence around your emotional well-being.
Yeah.
But what happens when somebody just like bulldozes right through that fence?
Oh, that's a great question.
Yeah, like what if setting these boundaries isn't enough?
That's a very common scenario,
Yeah.
unfortunately.
Yeah.
Narcissists often resist any attempt to kind of limit their control
Right.
or influence. It's like they see boundaries as a personal challenge.
Yeah. So what do you just like give up and let them run wild?
Absolutely not.
Okay.
Remember, setting boundaries is about protecting yourself.
Right.
So if someone is consistently disrespecting your boundaries, you might need to adjust your approach.
Okay.
Sometimes creating more distance in the relationship
Right.
is the healthiest option.
Okay, but like how do you create distance without like completely cutting somebody out of your life?
Yeah, it's definitely a balancing act.
Right, especially if it's like a family member
For sure.
or a close friend or somebody that you have to interact with a lot.
Yeah, so it might mean reducing the frequency of interactions,
Okay.
keeping conversations brief and surface level,
Got it.
or just setting stricter limits on what you're willing to discuss.
Right.
For example, you might decide, I'm not going to engage in conversations that are emotionally draining
Okay.
or that always seem to turn into arguments.
I like that. It's like choosing your battles,
Yeah,
protecting your energy.
exactly.
Yeah.
It's about recognizing that you don't have to be a passive participant
Right.
in a dynamic that's hurting you.
Right.
You always have choices.
Yeah. Okay. So you mentioned creating distance. Is there ever a time when like cutting off contact completely is necessary?
In some extreme cases, yes.
Oh, okay.
If the relationship is truly toxic
Right.
and it's causing you significant damage
Yeah.
to your emotional well-being,
Mm-hmm.
going no contact might be the only way to protect yourself.
Okay.
And it's not a decision to be made lightly,
Sure.
but sometimes it's the best option
Right.
for self-preservation.
It's about putting your own mental health first,
Exactly.
above everything else.
You can't pour from an empty cup.
I love that.
Taking care of yourself is not selfish. It's essential.
Yes.
And that brings us to another important point that the source makes,
Yes.
the power of self-care.
Yes, the source calls self-care like your shield against narcissistic manipulation.
I love that.
I love that image, but I feel like when you're already feeling drained from dealing with somebody like this,
Yeah,
like finding the energy for self-care
it's hard.
feels impossible.
You're right. It's not easy, but it's crucial.
Yeah.
So start small.
Okay.
Incorporate little things into your day that bring you joy or help you recharge.
Okay.
It could be like a 10-minute meditation,
Right.
a walk in nature, listening to your favorite music,
Uh-huh.
or even just taking a few deep breaths to calm your nervous system.
Sure.
It's about finding what works for you and making it a non-negotiable part of your routine.
I am a big believer in the power of a hot bath and a good book.
There you go.
Like just taking some time for yourself can really shift your perspective.
Absolutely.
And make you feel more grounded.
And it's important to remember that self-care isn't a one-size-fits-all solution.
Right.
What works for one person might not work for another.
Yeah.
So it's really about experimenting
Right.
and finding what truly nourishes your soul.
So this is all resonating a lot with me.
Good.
We're talking about like recognizing the signs, setting boundaries, prioritizing self-care.
Yeah.
It's like building a fortress around your heart and mind.
I love that analogy.
I'm trying.
It's about fortifying yourself from within
Yes.
so that you're less susceptible to the manipulations and negativity.
Right. So let's say somebody is listening to this and they're realizing like, oh my gosh, I think I might be dealing with a narcissist.
Yeah.
What's the first piece of advice you would give them?
Okay, so first of all, trust your gut. If something feels off in a relationship,
Yeah.
it probably is.
Right.
Don't dismiss your own feelings
Mm-hmm.
or try to rationalize someone else's bad behavior.
Right.
You are the expert on your own experience.
Yeah, it's so easy to like second guess yourself,
It is.
especially when you're dealing with somebody who's manipulative.
Yes, but you need to trust your instincts.
For sure. And then what's the second piece of advice?
Remember that you deserve to be treated with respect.
Yes.
You have the right to set boundaries,
Uh-huh.
and you don't have to tolerate behavior that makes you feel uncomfortable or disrespected or used.
And if you're struggling to set those boundaries or enforce them.
Don't be afraid to seek support.
Oh, okay.
Talking to a trusted friend, family member, therapist,
Right.
or even joining a support group can make a world of difference.
Okay.
You don't have to go through this alone.
Yeah, it's so easy to feel isolated.
It is.
And overwhelmed when you're dealing with this.
Yeah, and just remember, knowledge is power. The more you understand about narcissism, the better equipped you'll be to protect yourself
Right.
and maintain your own well-being.
Okay.
You have the power to create healthy, fulfilling relationships.
You know, as we've been talking about all of this, it really comes back to the idea of power.
Yeah.
The source itself is called Don't Give Your Power Away to a Narcissist.
Right.
And we've been talking about setting these boundaries and reclaiming your power.
Exactly.
It's like this constant tug of war.
It is. And, it's a great observation. And
Yeah.
I think it highlights why understanding these tactics is so important.
So it's not just about taking back your power. It's almost more about like never letting go of it in the first place.
That's exactly it.
Right.
It's about maintaining your sense of self, your values, your autonomy, even when you're faced with someone who's, might try to chip away at that.
And that makes me think about something else that the source talks about.
What's that?
The importance of self-awareness.
Right.
Like the more you know yourself, your needs, your tendencies.
Yeah. The harder it becomes for someone to manipulate you or control you.
Absolutely. Self-awareness is like a superpower in these situations.
Oh, yeah.
It's like having this internal compass
Right.
that helps you navigate these really tricky relationships.
You're less likely to fall for their tricks because you know your own worth.
Exactly.
You're not seeking validation from them.
Precisely. You're not dependent on their approval or admiration,
Right.
which can be such a huge source of power for a narcissist.
So, okay, we've got all these tools now.
Yeah.
We know how to recognize the signs, set boundaries, practice self-care, seek support when we need it.
Right.
But does it ever get easier?
That's the question, isn't it?
Yeah, like dealing with a narcissist, even with all this knowledge,
It's tough.
can be so draining.
Yeah, it's not a quick fix.
Right.
It's an ongoing process, especially if you're dealing with someone who's really deeply entrenched in these patterns.
Yeah.
But here's the good news.
Okay.
The more you practice these strategies, the more natural they become.
It's like building a muscle.
I like that.
The more you use it, the stronger it gets.
So it's not about becoming immune to the challenges, but about building that resilience
Exactly.
to navigate them.
And remember, even small steps forward can make a huge difference.
Okay.
Maybe you start by setting one small boundary or carving out 15 minutes for yourself each day.
Right.
Those small victories can really add up and create real change.
This has been such a great deep dive.
It has.
I feel like I have this whole new perspective now.
I'm glad to hear that.
On dealing with these personalities, what's one thing you hope our listener walks away with today?
I hope they feel empowered.
Oh,
Empowered to recognize narcissistic behaviors, empowered to set boundaries, empowered to prioritize their own well-being.
yeah.
And above all, I hope they remember that they're not alone.
Right.
There are resources and support available.
Yes.
And there's always hope for healing and growth.
This has been so insightful. I feel like I have a whole new set of tools to deal with these situations. So as we wrap up, think about your own experiences. Are there any situations where understanding narcissism might help you make sense of things or make different choices in the future? It's something to think about. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive, everyone. Remember, you have the power to create healthy, fulfilling relationships. Take care.